Hey you guys, welcome to this week's adventuring tip. Today we're talking about setup and payoff in storytelling. Now, most likely you are a storyteller, that's why you follow D20 Academy. And you want to figure out how to create those really effective stories. Well, using setup and payoff is a way to create satisfying and effective stories that really stay with the audience and that really feel satisfying to the audience. So let's kind of talk about what that is. Now, if you're not really clear on what I'm talking about, a setup in a story is when storytellers establish something, and a payoff is later on in the story when the thing they set up is used or resolved in a satisfying way. So in a basic example, at the beginning of the story, a character is given an item or an heirloom, and they're told that this will help them in their most dire time of need. Okay, and now we skip way later to near the end of the story, during the low point of the story, where every hope seems lost, everything seems doomed, that they're not going to be able to succeed. The main character's not going to be able to succeed. And then the character remembers about their that item or whatever. They take it out and then they use it in a creative way to solve the problem effectively. And this is satisfying to the audience because we were set up. They're going to use this item later in their most dire time of need, to help them. And then later on in the story, they do use it to help them in a kind of creative and original way. And so it's satisfying to the audience for that to happen. Now, a recent movie came out called Love and Monsters, and it's kind of just a classic, traditional, like, adventure story, coming-of-age story, where it's, like, post-apocalyptic, where monsters have taken over the world, these really big mutated, like, insects and reptiles. And the main character, he's in a bunker, and he decides to travel across the states to go find his girlfriend. He's like... He's kind of a nerd, and he's not really brave or strong or anything. But anyway, it's a pretty fun movie. But there are two payoffs in the climax of the story that really are effective and satisfying for the audience in a really interesting way. One of them is that they are fighting this big monster near the climax of the story, him and his friends. And things seem bad, and it seems like this monster's going to kill them. But then he notices the creature's weak point. And this is a payoff for a setup that they did earlier in the story, when they set up that he's an artist, and he loves sketching these monsters. And he's been building a book about these monsters and their weak points, and he's been studying them. And so that they've set that up throughout the whole film, and so it's satisfying at this point when they pay off, hey, he notices the weak point because he's been studying monsters. That's satisfying. However, they then turn this payoff on its head when they do another payoff. Earlier in the story, he's with some other characters, and they encounter this big monster, but it actually doesn't hurt them and leaves them alone, because this is actually just a peaceful monster. And one of the other characters tells him that you can tell by looking in their eyes if they're actually malicious or peaceful. And so in this moment, as later on in the story, climax of the story, he's fighting this big monster, he notices its weak point, he gets out a weapon ready to kill it, then he looks in its eyes and realizes this is actually a peaceful monster who's just being forced to attack them because it's been captured by the villains. And so instead of killing it, he actually breaks its bonds and frees it. And this is also a satisfying payoff because we established that looking in its eyes, you can tell whether a monster is malicious or actually peaceful. And so it is really interesting because they pay off, oh, he found the weak spot. That's cool, that's satisfying because he's been studying monsters the whole movie. But then we turn that on its head when we also pay off the fact that he looks into its eyes, realizes that that's actually a peaceful monster. He should free it instead of kill it, which is really awesome and satisfying. Now, good stories use setup and payoff to show character growth. If the protagonist of the story changes from greedy and selfish to loving and selfless, then maybe a setup in the beginning shows them, running into, like, someone less fortunate, like a homeless person, and not giving them any money or food because they're greedy. And then the payoff of this is at the end of the movie, they run into the same person, but this time give them food and money because over the course of the story, they have learned to become more selfless. That is another satisfying kind of way of doing setup and payoff. If you want a fantastic example of this, watch the first Back to the Future film. It's really, really good at this. And at the beginning of Back to the Future, Marty McFly, his parents, have some issues. The most important of which is that his father is kind of weak and gets pushed around by bullies. still, even as a father and a man. And then, of course, Marty McFly goes into the past, and he meets his parents back when they were in high school and stuff, and then he teaches his dad how to stand up to bullies and stuff. And so at the end of the movie, when he comes back to the present, his father is now brave and tough and is able to stand up to bullies. And so it's really satisfying as the audience to have set up that his dad's like this, but then at the end to show the growth and how Marty McFly had impacted his father when he went back in time. There's a lot of other setups and payoffs in that movie which are just really fantastic. It's just a great film that shows this off really well. But that does it for this week's adventuring tip. Subscribe, follow wherever you're watching this so you can get more of these every single week. And I will see you in next week's adventuring tip.